I need to walk you through something that happened behind closed doors at the White House, something that almost no one is talking about publicly right now. Two leaders went into a room together. One of them came out and gave a version of events that doesn't match what actually took place. Even more striking, both of them are still standing by completely different stories today. Let me lay out what we can verify. President Trump's Treasury Secretary appeared on national television and described one account of a key conversation. Canada's Prime Minister quickly came forward with a very different version. The truth lies somewhere in between those two accounts, and it is far more serious than either side is willing to admit openly. Let's go back to January 20th, 2026, the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. That annual gathering where the world's most powerful people come together, talk about global challenges, and quietly make deals that shape the lives of billions. Mark Carney takes the stage and delivers a blunt message. He declares that the American-led global order is over, not weakening, finished. He says the so-called rules-based international system that provided relative stability since the end of World War II no longer exists in any meaningful way. He never once says Donald Trump's name, but everyone in the room understood exactly who he was addressing. Trump, watching from the White House, was furious. The very next day, he hits back hard. He claims Canada only exists because the United States allows it to exist. He says Mark Carney should be grateful. And then he takes an extraordinary step. He cancels Carney's invitation to something called the Board of Peace. Yes, that group actually exists, but what happened next, almost no one saw coming. A week later, Trump picks up the phone and calls Mark Carney directly. They speak for roughly 30 minutes. When the call ends, both sides immediately release completely different descriptions of what was said. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent appears on Fox News, the same man who shapes much of Trump's economic policy, and says in very clear terms that Carney was aggressively retracting his Davos comments. In other words, Bessent claims Carney apologized and backed down. The very next morning, Carney stands in front of reporters in Ottawa and directly contradicts that account. He says, "Let me be perfectly clear, and I told the president exactly what I said in Davos. I meant every word. There was no apology. There was no retreat." The exact opposite of what the Treasury Secretary had just told American television viewers. So someone is not telling the truth. Either the U.S. Treasury Secretary fabricated a story about a private phone call, or the Canadian Prime Minister is pretending he stood firm when he actually folded. Both possibilities carry enormous consequences because this is not simply about personal pride or political spin. We are talking about the economic relationship between two countries that move $2.7 billion worth of goods and services across the border every single day. Now here is where things get even more concerning. Reports indicate Trump imposed 25% tariffs on Canadian goods, then raised them to 35%, and at one point threatened to push them all the way to 50% on steel and aluminum. 50%. That is not a bargaining tactic. That is economic warfare. Canadian factories began closing. Tens of thousands of jobs disappeared in Ontario alone. The aluminum industry was hit especially hard. Forestry workers were laid off. All of this damage started because two leaders could not find common ground. But the tariffs and job losses are not even the heart of the story. The heart of the story is what happened when they finally sat down face to face. In early February, Mark Carney traveled to Washington for his second White House visit since becoming Prime Minister. Before the meeting, Trump spoke to reporters and said Carney would leave very happy that Canada and the United States share mutual love. They smiled for the cameras, walked into the Oval Office with their teams, and closed the door. When they came back out, once again, two entirely different stories emerged. Official statements described the meeting as constructive and substantive. They said both sides would continue working toward agreements on steel, aluminum, and energy, with cabinet-level officials expected to reach deals soon. Classic diplomatic language that actually says very little. But accounts of what was really said inside that room paint a much darker picture. Trump told Carney there is a natural conflict between Canada and the United States, not competition, conflict. He said both countries want the same things, steel production, auto manufacturing, and therefore both cannot win. Carney tried to reframe it, saying the countries compete but are ultimately stronger together. A standard diplomatic move. But the photos from that day show it was not going smoothly. And then Trump, true to form, brought up the 51st state idea again. He joked that if Canada simply became part of the United States, all the tariff problems would disappear. Carney had to sit there and smile through it. Here's the piece almost no one is discussing openly. This whole situation traces back to that Davos speech. Mark Carney stood on that stage and said middle powers, countries like Canada, must start working together more closely. He used a blunt line: if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. He pointed out that the rules-based order was always partly an illusion, that the United States has repeatedly exempted itself when it suited American interests, and that international rules are applied unevenly depending on who breaks them. He said it is time to stop pretending otherwise. That speech received a standing ovation in Davos. It also made powerful enemies in Washington. Trump does not forget that kind of public challenge. So let's be very clear about what is actually happening here. The surface story, tariffs, trade talks, public statements, is not the real story. The real story is about power, who holds it, who is losing it, and what they are prepared to do to keep it or take it back. Mark Carney understands something that many people still refuse to accept. The United States is not the same unchallenged global leader it was 20 years ago. And the current administration is accelerating that shift by turning economic policy into a weapon. Every new tariff, every public threat, every late-night social media post is pushing allies away faster than Trump seems to realize. Canada controls resources the modern world cannot live without: energy, critical minerals, the raw materials that go into batteries, semiconductors, and nearly every advanced technology. Mark Carney is actively building trade relationships with China, Qatar, India, and many others. At first, Trump encouraged those moves, saying they would benefit Canada. But after the Davos speech, the tone changed completely. Now Trump is threatening 100% tariffs if Canada deepens any broader trade relationship with China, 100%. That would effectively end meaningful trade between the two countries overnight. Then Carney traveled to Beijing and secured a limited agreement. Canada lowers tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, and China reduces some of its retaliatory tariffs on Canadian canola, pork, and seafood. A modest deal, but one that works for both sides. Trump responded with fury, posting that Canada was becoming a backdoor for Chinese goods to enter the United States. Never mind that existing trade agreements already prevent that from happening in any significant way. Facts took a backseat to the attack, but the deeper damage is happening to the relationship itself. Canadian tourism to the United States has dropped sharply. Fewer people are crossing the border for vacations or shopping. Some Canadian retailers have quietly removed American products from shelves in protest. There is a growing sense among ordinary Canadians that their closest ally has turned against them. And here is something important to remember. Canada and the United States are not simply neighbors. Their economies are fused in ways that are almost impossible to separate. Supply chains cross the border multiple times before a single product is finished. A car part can move back and forth between Michigan and Ontario 3 or 4 times during manufacturing. When Trump places tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, American companies pay those tariffs. American consumers pay higher prices. American workers lose jobs when their employers can no longer afford the materials they need. This is the textbook definition of a lose-lose situation. In that White House meeting, Trump made his position unmistakable. He said he wants to end imports of cars and steel from Canada, not reduce them, end them. He wants full American production. Carney tried to explain that modern manufacturing does not work like that. You cannot simply relocate entire industries overnight. It takes years, sometimes decades, and the costs would be enormous. Trump was not interested in that explanation. He has a clear vision. Everything made in America, and any country that stands in the way becomes an economic adversary. It gets even more concerning. Trump has openly discussed the possibility of abandoning the USMCA entirely, the trade agreement he personally negotiated and signed during his first term, his signature trade achievement. Now he is talking about letting it expire and negotiating separate bilateral deals with Canada and Mexico instead. Why? Because bilateral deals give him far more leverage. When Canada and Mexico negotiate together under USMCA, they are stronger. They can coordinate positions. But if Trump forces them into separate talks, he can play one against the other. Classic divide and conquer strategy. Yet Mark Carney is not backing down. Despite what the Treasury Secretary claimed on television, despite the escalating tariffs and threats, Carney is quietly building what he calls strategic autonomy for Canada. In just 6 months, he has signed 12 new trade agreements across 4 continents. That is extraordinary for Canada, and every one of those agreements sends a clear signal to Washington. Canada does not need the United States as much as people once assumed. Sources now confirm that Carney laid this strategy out plainly during their phone call. He told Trump that Canada recognizes the world has changed, and Canada is adapting to that new reality. That statement likely triggered Bessent's claim that Carney was walking back his Davos remarks, because in Trump's worldview, any acknowledgement that America still matters counts as surrender. There is no room for nuance. You are either completely aligned or completely opposed. This is what keeps me awake at night. We are witnessing the slow-motion breakdown of one of the most successful partnerships in modern history. Canada and the United States have been allies for more than a century. They fought major wars side by side, created the longest undefended border in the world, and built the most deeply integrated economy anywhere on Earth. And now that relationship is cracking under the weight of ego, mistrust, and conflicting visions of the future. During the White House meeting, Carney offered $1 trillion in Canadian investment into the United States over the next 5 years, money for infrastructure, manufacturing, and job creation in American communities. Trump's response was to demand guarantees first. He wants trade terms settled before any investment begins. He is effectively holding the entire relationship hostage for a better deal. And Carney is left thinking, I just offered you $1 trillion and you're still threatening tariffs. So he is attempting something very difficult, stand up to Trump enough to satisfy Canadian pride, but not so much that Trump carries out his most extreme threats. It is pragmatic, it is principled, and honestly, I am not sure it can succeed, because you cannot build long-term stability with a partner who does not value stability. You cannot make reliable plans with someone who changes direction based on what they saw on television. You cannot rebuild trust with someone who publicly contradicts private conversations. This is what worries me most. We are witnessing the breakdown of core assumptions that have guided international relations for generations, that allies stay together, that shared economic interests produce cooperation, that deep integration reduces conflict. All of those assumptions are being tested right now in real time with real consequences. And the truly unsettling part is that we do not know what the world looks like when those assumptions no longer hold. Mark Carney is betting that middle powers can come together, create their own networks, and build a new kind of stability that does not depend on American leadership. Maybe he is right. Maybe that is the path forward. Canada, Australia, Japan, South Korea, European nations working together to preserve order in a world where superpowers have become unpredictable. Or maybe the system fractures. Maybe without reliable American leadership, we see regional blocs, more economic warfare, and rising tensions. No one has the answer yet. We are in uncharted territory. So I want to hear from you. Do you think Carney is right to stand firm and build alternative partnerships? Or should he be making more concessions to preserve the relationship with the United States? Does this change how you see the current situation? What am I missing? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. Thanks for staying with me through this. If you found this breakdown valuable, hit subscribe. We're building something here that focuses on the real stakes behind the headlines. Appreciate you watching. Let's keep the conversation going.